This week, the rise of ecotourism. How did sustainable travel take over the public psyche? And does it go against the idea of luxury?
I think we have to see if our global community still wants to travel this way when the pandemic is over.
The Green Skyscanner. We speak to Berlin startup Omeo about how it plans to replace planes with trains.
Employees around the world are working from anywhere, working from home. They're taking staycations, staying longer, and this means they're going into less crowded places.
And the dark side of conservation, how EU efforts to preserve Kenya's natural environment are exposing human rights concerns. From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. If the 20th century saw the birth of international tourism, then the 21st century has seen the boom in ecotourism. It's defined by the World Conservation Union as travel to natural areas that promote conservation, have a low visitor impact, and provide for beneficially active socioeconomic involvement of local peoples. It's now the fastest growing part of the travel industry, with 1 in 5 tourists worldwide now considered ecotourists. In this edition of Bloomberg Green, we'll look at the example of Costa Rica, which was an early adopter of the eco label. Then we'll speak to the CEO and founder of Omeo, a platform that seeks to become the Skyscanner of sustainable travel. Plus, the European Union's conservation efforts in Kenya will be evaluated in the context of their impact on tourism and the locals. Finally, we speak with an ecotourism pioneer about what countries and companies can do to make travel greener. So let's get straight to Central America. Costa Rica is ranked among the world's best ecotourism destinations, with 26 national parks and 58 wildlife refuges. The country was one of the first nations to connect nature conservation with responsible travel, and it's now an industry leader. Bloomberg's Sylvia Klamaki has the details.
Costa Rica's name literally means rich coast. Despite its small size, the Latin American country is one of the most biodiverse, home to roughly 5% of the world's known species, drawing over 3 million tourists each year. But the most impressive thing about Costa Rica is not just its natural abundance, it's the lengths its people have gone to in order to protect it. Here's how Costa Rica became a pioneer in ecotourism. Back in the 1940s, Costa Rica had one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world, as land was cleared to allow planting of crops. By the end of the 80s, the government intervened to restore the Costa Rican forests. In the mid-90s, it became illegal to chop down forested areas without approval from authorities. The government set up the pioneering Payments for Environmental Services program, which was financed primarily by a tax on fossil fuels. The scheme has paid a total of $500 million to landowners over the last 20 years to incentivize them to protect the land from deforestation. As a result, today, close to 60% of the land is once again forest, and the country is home to around 500,000 different species. Costa Ricans know the value of their tropical ecosystems, and there is a clear economic payoff. In 2018, tourism contributed about 7% of total employment, making about 13% of the country's GDP. But there is trouble in paradise. The surge in tourists and the demand for land from foreign buyers and developers is beginning to threaten Costa Rica's vast forests, with land prices being driven up for locals and foreign companies often seizing opportunities to monopolize the country's real estate and manufacture of basic goods. As a result, today there is a great economic inequality driving a wedge between Costa Rican citizens. The striking success Costa Rica has had in restoring and conserving its natural environment is now under threat.
Unfortunately for Costa Rica or other ecotourism destinations, getting there is more than half the battle. You could fly, but that brings with it a carbon footprint as fossil fuels are emitted into the upper atmosphere. So what other choices does the climate-conscious traveler have? The new answer might be an old one: trains. Rapid, electric-powered overnight trains could put travelers on track for a low-carbon getaway. Omeo is a travel platform that offers the chance to find flights, buses, and trains that connect to travelers' favorite destinations. The company just closed an $80 million funding round, and its CEO, Naren Sham, joins me now to discuss the future of climate-smart travel. Naren, great to speak with you. Can you first just give me an overview of what exactly Omeo does?
First of all, thanks a lot for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak with Bloomberg. Briefly in a nutshell, what Omeo does as a consumer is you can search and buy all modes of transport across all the countries we operate in, which is mostly 37 countries in Europe and US, Canada. So what that means is you can buy trains, buses, flights, airport transfers, shuttles, ferries, any mode of transport. We mainly focus on ground transport. And we connect with the underlying network operators, and we bring that inventory in a way for you to buy it in a simple manner with 2 clicks, ideally if you've already registered with us.
Okay, so clearly there's a lot of different options for a consumer that wants to travel. There's a lot of different ways that they can do it. How have you seen consumer selection of the way they travel change over the course of the pandemic? Are they taking ground transportation more? Are they training more rather than flying?
So there's been a huge shift in consumer behavior towards ground transport. Pre-COVID, ground transport's always existed. But for example, 50% of all tickets in ground transport used to be sold at a kiosk. So you would go stand in line, buy a paper ticket, which is not as environmental friendly as well. And consumers would travel corridors that would be 3 to 5 hours, ideally by train, which is in the 400 to 800 kilometer range, by flight, because it's a 1 hour flight. What we see is some fundamental shifts in consumer behavior. We're seeing a massive adoption towards mobile. So 80% of our bookings are coming from the app today, which is very, very large for consumers that have made a leapfrog from kiosk, not to website, but directly to the app ecosystem, which is very, very good. The second trend we see, which is quite positive, is corridors that used to be majority flight dominated, like I said, in the 3 to 5 hours of travel time. Today, consumers are taking trains. One, mainly because airports are, as you know, with the summer season, have a little more hassle to deal with. You have to go early, etc. But if you actually truly count door-to-door travel, trains go city center to city center. It takes you an hour to get to the airport. You have an hour check-in and an hour call it on the other side. So an hour and a half flight ends up being actually a 4.5 hour journey. So as consumers get more educated towards end-to-end transport, there's a clear shift into ground transport. And the last one, a very clear shift we're seeing is actually what's happening with the work culture, which is, employees around the world are working from anywhere, working from home. They're taking staycation, staying longer. And this means they're going into less crowded places, non-hub travel. And as non-hub tourism grows, you need access to ground transport because you're getting outside of the crowded airport and you're going into accessing trains and buses to reach your destination. So this is also fueled. So there's been some fundamental shifts in consumer behavior that I would say is here to stay and hopefully is better for the world as well in terms of sustainability.
Well, to that point, if these are permanent shifts in behavior, how much of it do you think is attributable to consumers and travelers wanting to be more climate conscious, wanting to travel more sustainably?
I think climate consciousness has been a trend that is incrementally growing over the last many years. It varies by region. For example, in Sweden, there was a huge flight shaming campaign. So most Swedes I know take trains even to go from Sweden to Italy, for example. So climate consciousness is definitely increasing. But I think the behavioral shifts we're seeing are largely driven by, call it the post-pandemic world in which we're experiencing, the world in which we work from anywhere, etc. And ground transport happens to be the better solution. Climate consciousness is growing. My wish is it grows faster because especially the younger generation is growing quite well, but it's not growing as fast enough to tackle the climate changes. So I think given there's a readily available solution, which is high-speed rail, given that governments are investing more, given that platforms like us allow easier ticketing, I just hope there's going to be a faster shift towards ground transport.
All right, Naren Sham, CEO of Omeo, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, while the leisure safari remains popular with wealthy Westerners flocking to Africa to see remarkable wildlife, there's a dark side of European conservation efforts on the continent. We'll discuss that next. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Here's all the climate news you need to know this week. A new report says the world won't reach net zero carbon emissions without putting an end to deforestation. The UN-backed Race to Zero campaign warns companies committing to eliminate emissions by 2050 must act with urgency to stamp out tropical deforestation in their supply chains. Cutting down trees to raise cattle or to sell timber is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. EU nations have endorsed a push to eliminate carbon emissions from new cars by 2035, effectively heralding the end of the era of the internal combustion engine in Europe. Environment ministers struck a deal after Italy gave up demands for a 5-year delay in the plan. The home of Ferrari says it's satisfied with a compromise that would enable the use of carbon-neutral fuels after 2035. And finally, plans to build the UK's first deep coal mine in 3 decades have been called absolutely indefensible by the chairman of the country's climate change watchdog. The mine in northern England would produce coking coal used in steel production. The government is expected to rule on its plans next week. It says the UK has cut emissions faster than any other G7 country in the past 30 years. And that's your Green Brief. Let's turn back now to the topic of ecotourism. Kenya remains a world-leading safari destination in 2021. That's according to the World Travel Awards. It's a country with diverse, rich habitats, and it's home to many endemic and threatened species. And while safaris bring in hundreds of millions of dollars for the country, conservation efforts have faced growing controversy. Bloomberg's Eileen Bagbo reports.
The safari as a holiday destination was born in the 1920s, with rich Europeans and Americans flocking to Africa to see and to shoot the remarkable wildlife. 100 years later, Kenya remains a world-leading safari destination. With a growth in eco-consciousness in the West, wildlife conservation has become big business in Kenya. The current conservation model began in the 1960s when US President Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. This was then introduced to the continent of Africa through public donors and government grants from the EU and the WWF. The European Union is now spending $32.5 million on a 6-year project to support Kenya's efforts to protect its reservoirs and high elevation forests, which the country depends on for its water supply. But why Kenya? The country is home to diverse and rich habitats, many of them endemic and threatened species, and more than 8% of Kenya's land is formally protected. These areas not only conserve endangered wildlife, but sustain the growing tourism industry, which is among the top 3 contributors to the country's GDP. Kenya boasts of 39 conservation zones and 55 national parks with luxury resorts as part of the scenery. For example, Old Jogi, owned by billionaire Wildestein's family, is one of the most popular private game reserves and exclusive safari experiences. For up to $300,000 per week, individuals and groups can have an entire 60,000 acres of wildlife conservancy to themselves. So while Kenya's conservancies have long cultivated an image of luxury and harmony with nature and of untouched African landscapes and happy locals, often in picturesque attire, you only have to look below the surface to reveal the human cost. The European Union's project is meant to aid Kenya's resilience to drought and climate change. But this program has faced controversy because of forceful evictions and even the killing of indigenous communities. More than 2,000 homes have been burnt down, and 5,000 people from the Sengwer indigenous community in the Embabut forest have been evicted. After a Sengwer herder was killed, the European Union was forced to withdraw funding for that particular conservation project in the area. Despite this, the EU has committed another $5.59 million for more conservation work in the country. The problem does not lie in Kenya alone. A 2021 report by the Oakland Institute said that land conservation in East Africa is still following a model based on violence and forceful evictions, which is being held up as a model by the EU in their new Nature Africa project, which is part of their Green New Deal. In northern Tanzania, an area roughly the size of Greater London is being cleared of human settlements and livestock to make way for a luxury game reserve run by an Emirati-owned company. The Tanzanian government claims that this newly protected area will benefit both tourism and conservation, but in the process, more than 70,000 indigenous Maasai people face eviction, and 31 villages have been reportedly shot at with live ammunition and tear gas during a forced eviction last month. So while ecotourism is rapidly becoming a main contributor to Kenya's economic growth, there are increasing questions as to whether it is worth the human cost.
Coming up next, the future of sustainable tourism. How does it impact local communities and economies? And what could the future hold for luxury ecotourism? Sustainable development pioneer and conservationist Megan Epler-Wood will join us next to discuss. This is Bloomberg Green. So we've seen some examples of good and bad ecotourism, and many are now calling for higher industry standards as to regulate the industry, especially when it turns out to be destructive to the local communities and environments. Megan Epler-Wood is a conservationist and ecotourism pioneer who founded the first NGO in the world dedicated to the fostering of tourism as a sustainable development tool back in 1990. As an NGO leader, she has dedicated her professional career to that effort, working in over 30 countries. And she joins me now. So, Megan, clearly you have been around to see a lot of progress in the ecotourism industry. How far does it still have to go?
Well, I think a lot of progress was made in 1990 through about 2010. It was led by pioneers, and a great deal of entrepreneurial energy was associated with it at that time. Lots of companies were founded, and lots of ideas have already been, exchanged many, many times around the world on how to make it even better. At this time, I would say it's a little hard to predict what will happen with it because of the big downturn in the tourism industry in general with COVID-19.
Of course, tourism as a whole has been jolted, and yet something we have seen emerge really since the onset of the pandemic is people wanting to be more conscious in their behavior, caring more about the social and economic and environmental consequences of the decisions that they make. So if the demand for ecotourism is there enough supply? Is there enough knowledge within the industry to be able to operate truly sustainable and environmentally sensitive tourism operations?
I would say it's one of the better examples of existing experience in sustainable tourism, because it was one of the first examples of trying to make tourism more sustainable. So we have over 30 years of experience. And as I said, many of our senior members, entrepreneurs, say, let's just take Costa Rica. They were one of the countries that founded the whole field of ecotourism. And to be frank, there's lots of experience and energy that's still there that could be helping to guide the world.
Well, something we talk a lot about here on Bloomberg, Megan, is the idea of greenwashing. And often we talk about it through the lens of ESG investing, where, a company says if you invest enough, we'll put it to good use. And the metrics are a little bit murky, and there's been a lot of concern around whether or not they're as green as they seem. Is there a similar problem in ecotourism? How do you guarantee that the places you're traveling to really are doing their best in order to ensure that environments and communities are protected?
Well, there's a variety of ways. One of the things that I recommend based on the research that we did at Harvard is integrated annual reporting. That's most of the businesses in ecotourism are not getting ESG screens. Mostly because they're not public companies. You're talking large companies, medium-sized enterprises, and then you have many small and even micro enterprises. So overall, The greenwashing would be hard to regulate because of the size of the businesses. But when you have the larger businesses, like the one we studied at Harvard Wilderness Safaris, they do annual accounting via integrated annual reporting and have received impact investment based on very, very serious screens. So overall, what we found is that that style of reporting for the larger businesses is very, very valuable.
Okay, so if some of the reporting and regulatory mechanisms have been challenges in the past, what are the greatest challenges for ecotourism now?
Well, I think we have to see if our global community still wants to travel this way when the pandemic is over. But assuming that there is substantial growth, what my work is showing is that we need to create public-private mechanisms to oversee the growth of tourism through what are called destination management organizations. They are public-private entities that are right now dedicated to just marketing tourism, and yet they receive taxes that enable the possibility of creating more substantial mechanisms to ensure our destinations are protected.
So essentially, the government needs to be involved in this as well. It shouldn't just be up to, as you say, private enterprises.
Well, the private enterprises need to step up, and we have to find common ground. But overall, if we don't protect these beautiful places around the world and conserve biodiversity and create more natural capital to protect our environment, we're not going to win, and business will lose out too. And I think there's a general understanding of that. But now we need to set up the management entities, which is what I'm dedicating my work to right now.
And finally, we're talking about ecotourism as a whole, but obviously there's different strata of tourism. There's luxury travel, for example. And I'm wondering, is luxury ecotourism an oxymoron, or is that something that can be real?
Absolutely not. It's not an oxymoron. What we want to see is ecotourism at all levels, all price points. That's the main thing. I've been very experienced working with community-based ecotourism. That has its own problems because they lack the experience in finance. Mid-priced ecotourism is working very well, and luxury ecotourism is working extremely well because, for example, Wilderness Safaris received that impact investment because just one guest was so interested in seeing that company grow that they helped to arrange that finance. So that kind of constituency is invaluable when you're talking about what I would call medium-sized companies growing to be even larger in a very responsible way.
So if I am a traveler and I'm looking to travel sustainably, I want to explore the idea of ecotourism, what should I expect? What does that experience look like?
Yeah, well, you should expect a lot of service and guiding. And also a chance to decompress. You're usually traveling some distance to do an eco tour. You shouldn't try to get out the next morning and just go crazy with the bird watching. What you need is that time to sink in, and then your guide should give you a chance, and the actual corporate ownership should be orienting you very quickly on what you're going to see and how they're going to manage that. And then from there, you have this very wonderful chance to be in these beautiful natural environments around the world and really get to see the natural environment in ways that many people don't.
All right, ecotourism expert Megan Epler-Wood, thank you so much for joining me. So the growing popularity of ecotourism is a step in the right direction, even if it still needs the international regulation to set real standards for the industry. That's it for this week on Bloomberg Green, but you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green.